Well, we're so glad to be here today. It's such an honor to be among you. And we really wanted to start just with a statement of hope, because our work as couple therapists, what we see is a change process on a daily basis. Couples fighting with this issue to overcome it. And we see people recover. We see marriages come together, relationships healed and saved. And what we're going to present to you is not only out of a body of neuroscientific research, but also clinical research as well as our own personal practices.
Okay, we're going to jump right in. The last workshop that was in here on promoting safety for couples, there's going to be a little bit of crossover today with this, but we think it's important to have some repetition and pass this by. So we're going to talk this base of attachment. Everyone has an inborn need from cradle to grave to be accepted, to belong, to feel comfort, and to feel safe. Again, this begins at birth, and it's something that doesn't go away. If you've seen older couples who've been married a long time, they have these same needs with each other as well. This is not something we outgrow. It doesn't make us immature. It's not regressive. It's just part of being human and finding that safety, and it's a survival thing.
And we know from the research that babies who don't have emotional attunement, don't have attention, don't have comfort, aren't able to receive that from their attachment figures, have failure to thrive. We die if we're isolated emotionally. We can't live without it.
The best example of this is the movie Castaway, where Tom Hanks, in a survival movie where he's looking for shelter, fire, food, he also finds attachment in this volleyball Wilson. And it's a wonderful example of how critical this is to us. Pornography addiction, sexual addiction, is an attachment disorder. It is an intimacy disorder. Its roots are in attachment failure, attachment problems. And so attachment is part of the problem in terms of why addicts end up in the addiction. And we're going to show you today that attachment is also the solution for not only healing the addiction, but also promoting growth as a couple.
So we ask these questions about responsiveness, accessibility, engagement. Can I reach you? Do you care how I feel? Am I important? Do I matter to you? Will you be there when I call? Those are important questions that we all, to have emotional resonance and engagement, to have emotional safety, we need to feel secure about that. When we ask those questions, the answer is yes. Ed
Tronick, who's a developmental researcher at Harvard University, said the following: "We thrive in the messiness of human connection. Without it, we wither." And so, as you see in these relationships that are affected by pornography addiction, that the couples are facing tremendous ambivalence. It's messy. There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of disconnection. There's a lot of pain and trauma. But in many cases, there's still a sense of thriving in this connection, this sense of it's still better than being alone. And a lot of the times, this process is confusing to those who are watching it from the outside and assume that the person would be better off away from it. But we're here to show you that this attachment and this drive to feel connected is actually part of the solution.
Those needs that we have, the attachment needs that Geoff had, what we call the ABCs of attachment, are: can you accept me? Do we belong together? Can you comfort me? Is there safety in our relationship? Many times in the couple relationship, when there is a pornography addiction, not all of those needs are unmet. Some of them are unmet, but not all. And so there is that ambivalence in the relationship, but there's also the ability for the relationship to create healing and curing.
And this is the great dilemma. The addict becomes a source of pain for the partner, obviously, because of the betrayal with the pornography. The addict also has always been a source of comfort for the partner. And so the addict is two things for the partner. He triggers her pain. He also triggers her comfort. And she's the same for him. She's a source of pain when she brings up her distress. She's also a source of comfort for him. And so the couple has to figure out how to activate that in their benefit. So we talk about the secure base of attachment. This is a need that we have since we're born. And we're going to show you a video clip of a study that Ed Tronick did called the still face experiment. This is a very simple study, and it illustrates what happens to us when we can't get to our attachment figure. It makes sense as a baby or as a child to know that children need connection to survive and thrive. And we're going to show you this video clip from the perspective of a baby to a mother. But I also want you to watch it with the perspective of adult attachment, this sense of what happens to us as adults when we can't get to our attachment figure, which is our partner. We have two main primary attachment relationships. We have our parents when we're born, and then we, as it says in the Bible, we leave that attachment relationship and we cleave to a new one, which is our marriage. And in this new attachment relationship, we have the same survival needs to be close. So I want you to watch this video clip from the perspective of a spouse who can't get to their partner, who may be looking at pornography or distant, or an addict whose wife is shut off and disconnected. And I want you to see what happens.
When that attunement is restored, did you see the regulation come back into the baby?
We don't expect babies to self-regulate, do we? We know when they cry, we come get them, we comfort them. And here's a fact. Adults actually do better with that same co-regulation than they do trying to self-regulate. If I have an argument with my wife, I can certainly go out and drive around in my car to make myself feel better, but I will feel better when I reach to her and try and get that same comfort and reassurance and closeness again, just like this little baby. We're not any different than these babies, and that's what we want to show you, is that this co-regulation, this attunement, this connection is so important for helping us manage emotions.
So it passes to us, as Geoff's been talking about, this need for a secure base, to have this ability to have this co-regulation with each other. We know that when we have it, all the studies are really clear. When we have it, we live longer, we have more confidence, we have less conflict, there's less depression, less aggressiveness, we're able to have more emotional regulation, we have increased self-awareness, increased other awareness, less disease. We recover more quickly from injury, from even operations. Our wounds heal faster. There's no downside. There's just no downside to being securely attached and being able to co-regulate with our attachment figures.
Here's another example of attachment. This is from the movie John Adams, the HBO series that they did. And this is an example of what secure adult attachment looks like and how comforting it can be.
So I hope that you notice, some of the things that we notice as therapists when we see that, why we hold that up as an example of secure attachment, is, she started out harsh, didn't she? Blaming, kind of critical, coming at him. He held his ground. You could see him kind of thinking, maybe going into that logical set. But then she also talked about her fear. And he met her there, right? I'm afraid too. And they both shared their vulnerability. So it came from a me, her saying me, and him kind of going into a me place to really this team. We're going to fight this together. We're both afraid, and we're both fighting it together. And that's what we find in healing pornography. When that team is created of fighting it together, those vulnerabilities are shared, that the recovery process is enabled and is sped up.
And so Sue Johnson says, the people we love are the hidden regulators of our bodily processes and our emotional lives. I underline body and emotions because addiction affects the body and the brain at a very profound level, but it also is an emotional disorder as well. And so having this secure connection to your partner or working toward that over the course of recovery is one of the best regulators for avoiding relapse, for avoiding or getting into long-term recovery. And so we really want to harness the power of this regulator as opposed to just encouraging each person to do it on their own by themselves.
What we know, why this is so important, is because emotion is the first responder. By the time the emotion has registered and gone up to the prefrontal cortex to even figure out what am I feeling, what's the threat here, there's a long time span between that. So the emotion is the first responder, and so being able to work at that emotional level, we can work from the top down, regulate ourselves, go off, figure out how to do things on our own, but it's a much slower process. When we're able to work through the co-regulation and the emotional system, then the change happens much faster.
We want people in recovery to focus on their emotional and body processes as cues for helping them move toward the secure bond of their relationship. This idea of the reaching is not optional. Babies reach, adults reach, everybody reaches. Reaching for the addiction is a form of reaching. It's a form of trying to co-regulate these difficult emotions. And so people may act like they can do this on their own, but they're actually still reaching. They're reaching inside and out to the addiction versus trying to reach toward God, toward groups, toward people, toward their partners. And so that's what we're trying to promote, is to harness this already occurring reach that's going to happen no matter what. We want it to go the right direction.
This emotional drive to have acceptance and belonging and comfort. We want to harness that to reach in the right places. So we just wanted to mention a little bit about codependency, because if you're involved at all in other pornography literature, you're going to hear a lot about codependency. And we just want to say that we think it's so important that we're dependent. We're made to be dependent. And codependency gets a bad rap. Of course, people are going to get upset and dysregulated, right?
Right.
There's no option to do that. But to use the emotion then to come back into co-regulation is what's important, not to use it to increase isolation.
We're not big fans of using this word. We prefer the phrase healthy regulation or unhealthy regulation. These ideas that we're trying to give permission to people to be dependent. We recognize that to act like you don't need people is really impossible. And we think it promotes more disconnection. And so early on in recovery, when people are struggling and the wound is so fresh and there's no trust and there's been major betrayal, then a lot of the times, understandably, the emphasis is on separate, separate, separate. We recognize that people are going to separate because they can't be close. But we prefer to think of it as this idea, if you've got a couple and then one person turns away into the addiction like this, it's common that the other person turns away like this. We're encouraging both people to turn around, and they may have to face each other at a distance, but that still promotes more of a sense of connectedness than this. And so this idea of codependency sometimes can be confusing and make people feel like there's something wrong with them if they need their partner. And we want to promote that both people need each other, and we want to promote the addict for reaching to the partner, turning toward her, instead of going back out to the addiction.
So the tricky thing about this turn away part is that when we think about it, what happens is we turn away from our needs, really, our needs for acceptance, belonging, comfort, and safety. And that can come out. In the addict, it can come out reaching away outside of the relationship. In the partner, it can come out turning away from the addict, either shutting down, emotionally vulnerable, or shutting down in a way that they come towards the partner with a lot of anger, right? And so that dysregulation can happen, and the turning away has to do with turning away from sharing the vulnerability for acceptance, belonging, comfort, and safety.
So this is a universal human need. So we're going to walk you through a sequence right now that's going to outline a way that we see that couples can start to introduce and understand this and harnessing this power of co-regulation, of using the power of this attachment that we don't have a choice about, it's built into us, using this as a way to help overcome the addiction and promote closeness as a couple.
This is a big shift in the literature. It's a big shift in societal thinking, especially in the neurobiological research, towards what's now called the social baseline model. For many years, even in all of the neurobiological research, we were looking at independence as the goal, and cognitive processes, thinking processes, were punctuated and highlighted as the goal. And now what we're looking at is that that's really unobtainable for most people. It's unobtainable for us as people without having our social baseline needs met to begin with.
So really our baseline is in a group, and we only feel distress when we're away from that connection. And so it's not this idea that we're individuals and we feel better when we move toward people. It's the opposite. We start in groups and we feel worse when we're away from that. And so we want to promote helping people know how to stay connected to that baseline, which is where their greatest source of comfort is going to come from. And again, it's an inborn need. The baby cannot self-regulate. We don't expect babies to. Adults can self-regulate, but they don't do it as well as they do when they're connected to an attachment figure.
And we actually do it out of things like being able to hold a safe representation in our head of someone that loves us and cares about us.
Right. So the baby The reason you can leave your child in a nursery or with a friend to babysit and so on is because ultimately the baby starts to remember that you're going to come back for them. They have an internal representation of you, and they know that you'll come back. Partners have the same thing. When an adult partner is in pain, they can start to hold on to those moments where they felt close, and that helps them kind of hold on to it. We want to promote that. So it's very, very soothing to know that your partner will be there for you. So we're going to use the genie as a representation of the addiction. And symbolically, we think it's a very powerful image because it's a mirage, it's counterfeit. It has a component of secrecy and this cover-up down inside the bottle. And obviously it promotes a lot of fantasy, wishes, unfulfilled dreams and desires, and it's this place where you can go and take all your fears, your longings, your dreams, your sadness, your pain, and so we're going to use that as an
escape into fantasy, right?
Yes, exactly.
So we're thinking the addiction as a counterfeit attachment.
Right. So we want to make clear this point that it's a counterfeit attachment because it provides all the same types of feelings of acceptance, belonging, comfort, and safety that the partner can also provide. The reason it's a counterfeit, obviously, is because just like Patrick said in the opening meeting, is that it's never enough. It never really satiates. It never creates that sense of deep resonance and satisfaction. It only creates more drive, and it's more disconnecting. So it's a counterfeit.
It's inherently dissatisfying. So we have here the addict with all of these needs, unmet needs, hidden in the box. Oftentimes, we're unaware of those things. We're not really brought up and taught about how to even be vulnerable and to share, especially men in our society. You know, vulnerability is considered weakness or being tender, right? And so all of these needs for acceptance, belonging, comfort, and safety are kind of packaged up in a box out of awareness, and he goes towards the counterfeit attachment to try to get those needs met.
And if you notice that he's carrying those away from him, they're not even really part of him. A lot of our work with addicts is to help them learn to internalize and to integrate these emotions, these needs, these desires, and own them and bring those to their partner. But like she said, the addiction starts to cast a shadow on the person and creates this draw of just taking those there. Most people that struggle with pornography addiction learn to take these needs long before they had a secure attachment with their wife. And so they've already formed this bond, and in some ways the wife becomes the competing attachment. And so what we want to do is help them learn to bring these to their partner. But this is the sequence we're going to start with here, is that this is what starts to happen when they get activated in these needs to feel comfort, belonging, and safety. Most people think that pornography addicts get triggered into the addiction through sexual stimuli. That's actually not true. That may be kind of obvious on the surface, but what's really activating it is that the sexual part activates this deeper longing to be accepted, to provide comfort, belonging, and safety. I heard one person say one time that when there's a healthy sexual release, it creates the feeling that everything's going to be okay. And those deeper longings are what move the addict toward the addiction, not just because he's turned on by a sexual stimulus.
Those satisfaction hormones, oxytocin, and in men, vasopressin, that occur during sexual stimulation, arousal, and orgasm, also, we find that those actually occur early on. The release of oxytocin in close communication, right? In sharing vulnerabilities, in sharing our more vulnerable parts, our hopes and dreams, the things that we're concerned about. That in conversation, actually, having that co-regulation is where it really begins, that sense of satisfaction.
And so, of course, what happens is that as the addict reaches for the addiction becomes more elusive and unavailable because it's a counterfeit, it's a mirage. And so there's a desperation and a longing to have that connection, but they're going away from the real source of connection that they have, which is going to be in their secure base of their relationship that they've left. And again, they may be doing this long before they're even married. In many cases, that's the situation. So naturally, it's going to promote distance.
So when there's distance in the couple relationship, there's an increase of unmet needs for acceptance, belonging, comfort, and safety. And so we've got these this dilemma really, where you can get this stuck place where you have these needs, people aren't able or know how really to share them in ways that pull their partner close to them. And often we share them in ways that distance our partner, isolate us from our partner, or push our partner away.
I have wives tell me all the time, he doesn't come to me for any of his needs. I feel distant from him. And so a lot of the times, they're already experiencing a loss of acceptance, belonging, comfort, and safety long before the wife even knows about the pornography addiction. And it's because he's taking those boxes, that package of those needs to a different place. He's keeping them away from her, and she can feel that. And then when she learns about the addiction, of course, the same thing happens, where she's not bringing those to him either. She's cut off from him as well because of the trauma. And so you've got two people now that are feeling lots of distance and complete isolation from each other, and they're wanting to somehow regulate, but they don't know how to connect with each other to provide that safe, ultimate co-regulation.
And so there's some sense of trying to get independent, right, through denying dependence.
Yeah, so basically what this means is that the addict is struggling with this dilemma of, I need my partner, I want to be close to her, and I feel that in me. I know that like she can help me feel better.
Every time I approach her, though, she's crying, she's mad, she's traumatized. Oh my goodness, how do I go towards her when the last thing I want to do is break her world apart, have her see me as this awful person, and have my contact create all of this upset and this pain for her.
Right, so when he moves toward her in dependency, this connection, it makes things worse for him. And for both of them, it can feel really intense. So a lot of the times, he's telling himself, and sometimes being told by others, you've got to self-regulate, you've got to do this on your own, you've got to be strong. And a lot of the times, that can push him into doing what he's always done, which is relying on himself, which makes him more vulnerable to the addiction. And so this idea of turning toward his partner and being dependent is very risky business for him and for her, because it can create more pain. And so we want to talk about a way to slow this down so that we can start to help the addict harness and move on those feelings of closeness and wanting to be connected to her as a way to help him self-regulate, and also for her to be able to access the same power and take the addiction completely out of the equation as a regulator, because it's leaving both of them feeling worse. That's the truth.
If he hangs on to that addiction, then that's that false sense of independence and isolation that keeps the relationship inherently unsafe.
So true strength, individual strength, is actually built on a foundation of secure dependence. And this is a very un-American kind of concept, right? We have a tendency to sort of want to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and be independent and never need anybody and be completely autonomous. But the reality is that we're only really able to do that when we feel secure and connected. It's not the other way around.
The stronger our foundation is, the more independence we have. Really, the more we acknowledge and we meet those dependency needs, the more freedom we have to be independent. They work together.
So the more that they're not mutually exclusive, they're two sides of the same coin. So the more an addict moves toward his wife in these small ways, and we'll show you kind of what that looks like, the more he turns toward her. And Dan and Todd and Dorothy did a great job talking about ways that men can turn toward their wives and move toward this providing safety. These are the things we're talking about that are turning toward the dependency, turning toward this attachment. And we'll also talk about ways for wives to do that toward the husband, because ultimately in long-term recovery, we want both of them turning toward each other in their pain, with her triggers, with his triggers, and they're all emotional triggers. We're getting way beyond sexual triggers at this point. It's all emotional.
So we talked about this just a little bit, about kind of this dichotomy that happens between where do I go with my needs, and from the partner's point of view, how do I go towards him when he's unsafe? And I don't know where he is. I don't know who he's turning to or where he's turning. And I thought it was me, and now it's not. What Do I continue to be vulnerable? Or if I go and cry to him, he doesn't seem to like that. It seems to wall him off more. What do I do with all of these needs? And how do I go towards? And that trying to cap all of that emotional pain ends up in this overflow of energy. It often gets bigger, right? There gets more intensity around it. And the more intense it is, the more disconnection that can happen in the relationship. Because oftentimes the addict goes out of the relationship to manage emotional disconnection and that intensity. And now the partner's learned about it, and there's this overflow of energy as well. And they can get caught in this pattern of disconnection.
And the dilemma and the unfortunate thing is that a lot of times the partners, with all these needs, the sadness, the loss, the betrayal, the longing for closeness and safety, comes over to him in the form of anger and yelling and criticism and checking and nagging, or just complete distance and that energy, that disconnection. There's just so much energy coming over to him, and all he gets is, I'm bad, I'm a loser, and she doesn't love me.
I ruined your life.
I ruined your life. So then he packs it up and goes to the addiction in many cases. And so I want to be clear on this. The wife is not causing him to go to the addiction. Please don't misunderstand this. This is a very important point. It's just showing that the way that he has regulated his emotions has always been alone or through the addiction. And this is the dilemma he gets into, is that, what do I do with all these strong emotions that I'm getting? And he's trying to quit the addiction, he's trying to come to his wife, and he's not sure how to do both of them. What we're wanting to teach is to step back from the process and look how the energy is flowing between the two of them, to really see how her energy affects him and his energy affects her, and how him being closer to her and more open, and her getting in touch with more of the sadness and talking about it that way, and unpacking some of that intensity with him, they can start to see what's going on, and it really calms the system.
In this co-regulation process, we're really talking about a flow of energy and information. That's what happens in our brains. It's a flow of energy and information, which we have emotion that drives that. And so when we're looking at this flow of energy, when the partner is coming towards the addict, even in anger, in confusion, in sadness, and despair, that energy is coming towards the partner, because the partner's the solution, right? If we're together, then I'm not so scared, and my world isn't devastated. I can actually remember who you are, who the rest of you is. I can see more of you, and so that need for that as we're going towards each other, that's so important to remember, that the partner's coming towards because they see the addict as the solution. The addict ends up going away because feeling overwhelmed and not knowing how to manage emotional regulation and wanting to protect the partner from more distress.
And this is so new and confusing for a lot of men that we work with, which is that when we start to explain that your wife is coming to you with all this intensity, is because she sees you as part of the solution. You are the solution for her. She sees that if you can hold that and hear what she's saying and stay with her in that pain, then she will calm down. She'll feel heard and comforted and safe, like picking up a crying child. And it's not to say she's being immature or regressive. It's just that same activated need for belonging, comfort, and safety. So the anger is really her coming to him as a solution, and for him moving toward her for the same thing, as he's being open and honest and doing things and moving toward her. He's seeking her for a solution as well, and they're helping each other slow down their emotional regulation system and really getting that more finely tuned. On your handout, we gave you a copy of this addiction cycle. This is one other way to graphically represent what we're trying to discuss here, and I'll just quickly go over this with you and point out on the screen. So we talk about how when the addict over here is in his addiction, there's this inner loop going on here. There's this inner part of the addiction where he's concealing, he's acting out, he's isolated, he's in his shame, and then he gets left with this feeling of, I'm unacceptable, I'm in my shame, I'm not a good person, I feel bad, I fear people see me as a loser and that nobody can ever know my pain or what's going on with me, my behavior. He gets more anxious, more withdrawn and shut out. And he's been probably doing this same little cycle internally long before he met his wife. But when he gets into a relationship, he is already pretty withdrawn and checked out emotionally if he's in his addiction. And so when he's shut out or emotionally unavailable and not coming to her with these needs, this becomes like an infinity loop here, like this. So he brings out, he's shut off, she can sense it, she doesn't have all of him, feels disconnected, this deep longing for connection is not being met. It starts to activate this fear of abandonment, the sense that she doesn't matter, activates this kind of surface behavior of anger, anxiety that starts to show in the criticism, the instructing, the monitoring, the checking. But then the energy that flows back in the relationship, what he's experiencing is a combination of his own stuff he's doing in addition to this other energy of feeling like he's a big loser and that's all he's getting from the relationship, and then it creates more shutting out. The solution to this, of course, is that he has to work on doing everything he can to end this inner cycle so that he can be more accessible and available to her. And then as he moves toward her, she starts to feel seen and heard and connected. It drops a lot of this out, and she's able to stay closer and feel safer. And then it helps both of them start to regulate their emotions and start to feel ultimately more safe and secure, which is the solution for long-term recovery in a couple. And so we want to give you this representation there so you can track what we're talking about.
This little dotted line represents kind of what's under the surface and what's above the surface, what we see, what our partners see, what's kind of shared more openly. And so often what's above the line is the defensive response, not the vulnerable response, not the fears or the sadness that happen. And so each partner's not necessarily seeing the other one. They can experience being the pursuer, or the partner often will experience being shut out. As Geoff said, that triggers all of that. She can come out angry, anxious, upset. And then he experiences as, oh, she's upset, so I guess that confirms I'm bad, and I must keep away then. Those feelings of badness move us away. And then what she sees is frozen, numb, anxious, upset, or his defensive responses. What she doesn't see is the acting out and the isolation that comes from the acting out.
Right, and so in our couples work, this is why couples work is so important in this process, because oftentimes the couple only sees what's above the line. And when they start getting access to what's below the line, which is really what's driving the whole system, her reactivity, his reactivity, and acting out behaviors, which is kind of what he's chosen to do to go there. When they see that softer kind of underbelly, that more vulnerable side of what's really going on under the surface, it's amazing how it slows down the system. It helps the couple start to see what's really going on. And all of a sudden, she can start to respond to him a little bit better. He can start to respond to her a little bit better. And they both actually get more of a recovery resource because of that. If we only ever work on it on the surface, on the top, and manage the behaviors on top, we miss out on really activating this deeper, vulnerable attachment longing that really slows things down and helps couples feel safe together.
And so as the couple reaches out for that regulation, often to groups, families, friends initially, so that their dysregulation doesn't lead them to more isolation from each other, that they're able to start then to bring into each other and those deeper fears and the things that are below the surface.
A lot of people will practice learning how to reach out vulnerably with a church leader, with a friend, with a group. And this is a place where they can learn to start to co-regulate in a healthy way. And it's good practice for when they have to take what's going to feel the riskiest to them, which is with their partner. Because that's where all their survival needs are wrapped up and is in their partner. And women and men can benefit from group settings and connecting with others that allow them to practice this co-regulation. And then obviously the goal is to put the couple back together to allow their closeness and proximity and reaching for each other from these emotional places to be the ultimate way that they regulate themselves and prevent the addiction from taking over and her trauma from taking over. We want both of them to be able to co-regulate in a healthy way.
So we provided you some, on the handout, also some quotes from Sue Johnson. Sue Johnson is the developer of emotionally focused therapy, and that's the model that we're basing a lot of this work on. And you can read about adult attachment. Really, it's being in a romantic love relationship is what adult attachment is. So we hope you'll take a minute to read those quotes. And then just in closing, these normal ways of achieving intimacy involve reaching out to life. In addiction, this reaching motion is almost always totally inward to the point of withdrawing. Addiction exists within the person, and whenever addicts become preoccupied or act in addictive ways, this forces them to withdraw, to isolate themselves from others. The longer an addictive illness progresses, the less a person feels the ability to have meaningful relationships with others. Addiction makes life very lonely and isolated, which creates more of a need for the addict to act out. When the addict hurts, he or she will act out by turning to the addiction for relief, just as someone else may turn to a spouse, a best friend, or spiritual beliefs. For the addict, the mood change created by acting out gives the illusion that a need has been met. We want for, as addiction, in addiction recovery, for those needs to be met, to truly be met through healthy attachment.
And you can see that this is really the root of what's driving the addict toward the addiction, is this deep longing for connection, acceptance, belonging, comfort, and safety. And not just because the person's a pervert or is sexually turned on. It's this deeper longing. And we want them to have that need met in a healthy way. So here are some practical suggestions on what you can do as you work with people that struggle with this, or if you're in here as someone in recovery. This will help you give an idea of what both people can do to start this process of co-regulation so that we don't just have to wait for one person to calm down and then the other person gets their needs met. We believe that both of them can slowly start helping each other earlier in the process. So I'll speak about the addict and we'll have Becca speak about the partner. For the addict, he needs to come out of hiding and be transparent. He needs to open up and do a full disclosure. He needs to become completely honest about all his behavior and let his partner know what the reality is. Lying to someone is stealing their reality from them. So this openness and this transparency allows her to make sense of her life. Recognizing in inside of himself that all his sexual triggers, like we talked about, are actually emotional triggers, and that he can use those to move toward his partner. He needs to learn how to identify these emotions and make sense of them, what they're telling him to do, these softer feelings that are driving him there. And this takes a lot of work to get to that. He can start practicing this by reaching out to report. Instead of just coming to someone and say, well, I almost had a slip or a relapse, he can come to them and say, I was feeling lonely last night. I was feeling scared last night. I felt abandoned. I felt cut off. I went to talk to my mom and she ignored me. Or I reached out for you and you were busy doing that. And they can get in touch and reach out to report. Both, if it starts out with a sexual slip report, that's okay, but we want to help them go further and get into what was going on under the surface. We encourage men to look for ways that their partner is reaching to them already. In a lot of cases, it's the fact that she's still in the relationship is a way that she's still reaching. We want to encourage that. There's lots of ways that we reach toward each other that we miss, that we don't see. We want to encourage that. So look for ways that she's already doing that. And then, of course, ultimately, start practicing reaching out for comfort. Start asking for that. A lot of addicts are so out of touch with what they need that it's all in these boxes they don't understand. As they start to unpack that and make sense of it and own it, they can start asking for this. I want you to sit with me a little longer tonight. Can I be with you? And these are all non-sexual needs. It can be sexual needs, but we find early in the process of recovery, the emotional needs are much safer. And all of these needs are emotional, obviously, but we want people to learn how to start reaching and asking for that acceptance, belonging, comfort, and safety.
And for the partners to begin to recognize that the addiction isn't your fault, that there's a lot involved, pattern-wise, habit-wise, all of the emotions, having those needs packed in boxes, being unaware of them, and it's not your fault. That's a really important thing, not to take it on. But there also doesn't mean that you're not without influence, that you can't help there either. So learn how the addiction and the attachment interact. And there's lots of information you can get about attachment and how that works. We're just kind of scratching the surface here with you today. you can practice reaching out in healthy ways to others and to your partner, to the addict. Start to share below the line, and you can also see that if when you're sharing below the line, it becomes overwhelming to your partner, that that's really not your fault either, that there's a way that the two of you haven't yet learned to share and to co-regulate, and that's just part of the system. And that can be changed, because we can change all of those things and change our whole brain, our neural responses as we keep practicing these things. Look for the ways that the addict reaches to you. And you may need to check in with that. You know, what does he do? Lots of times addicts will get very involved in doing performance-based things to try to show their love and care because they don't know how to share what's below the surface. Look for those things and note them, make them important. Think back about ways when the two of you felt more co-regulation together so that you can look for those ways that your partner has always responded to you and those places of belonging that you had before. You can experiment with ways to influence the recovery process. Things evolve as people go through recovery, and you can also reach out for comfort to a supportive group as well as to your partner. Don't leave him out of the loop in your reaching and sharing your vulnerability.
This is our contact information, but at the bottom of this, we also want you to know that if you're looking for therapists who specialize in this kind of attachment-based work, the International Center for Excellence in EFT has a Find a Therapist link on there. And the LifeStar program is also a program that we're affiliated with that also works with couples in recovery. And these are good places to find resources to help couples hold themselves in this recovery process so that they can start turning toward each other and having this co-regulation work for them. Is that it?
That's it.
Okay, thank you.